What's going on, everyone? Welcome back into the Frogs Up TCU Sports Podcast. I'm Russ Hodges. That is Anthony North. We appreciate you all joining us again, recording here Sunday evening, January 14th. It is frigid cold out there everywhere. I know in Texas there's a pretty big cold front sweeping through, and my gosh, I walked out this morning and just the vapors coming off my breath. It was 13 below when I walked outside this morning to meet my folks for brunch. It's super chilly out. Hopefully everybody's staying warm, staying cozy this weekend. Hopefully watching some football as we have some big time basketball news to talk about on the podcast this evening. TCU stunning the number 2 team in the country. Emanuel Miller with a game-winning layup in the final seconds as TCU knocks off the Houston Cougars. 2 top 10 wins for the Frogs this week as TCU also took down Oklahoma, the number 9 team in the country, at home earlier in the week. TCU Football had a big-time weekend in the portal as well, picking up 6 new commits, 5 of them defensive backs. And we will hit on the national championship game as well as some of the coaching news that is breaking right now in college football. But Anthony, I'm not sure how cold it is down by you, but it's getting pretty frigid up here, and it's going to be pretty dicey over these next couple of days with temperatures in the negatives and the negative teens with some pretty brutal wind chill.
Yeah, that's what it's going to feel like here. I mean, for us Texans, the numbers in the teens, in the 20s, it might as well be in the negatives. We can't deal with it at all. Luckily, it doesn't seem like we're going to get the terrible snowstorm to come through here like went through much of like the Kansas City and Iowa and all of that. So hopefully we stay away from the terrible ice storms like we've had in the past. But it is very cold, and people are sheltering up. They're not out and about, that's for sure.
Yeah, I still crack up sometimes when I was at TCU around this time of year when we did get some snow. It's like everything just shuts down.
Oh yeah,
in Texas when you get just a little bit of a sprinkle.
Everybody pulls out their ski suits and their giant jackets, and we pull that out when it's 50. So
you're throwing sand around to try and give people space to walk. And gosh, there was several years ago. I think this is when I was a sophomore or a junior back in like 2014 maybe or 13. There was a big ice storm that came through Fort Worth, and campus was literally shut down for a week. Classes were canceled. The only thing they had at the Blue was chicken served like 5 different ways. They had fried chicken, they had grilled chicken, chicken wraps, anything they could get their hands on to serve to the students because everything was just shut down. Nobody was going anywhere. But travel I know has been pretty crazy right now as well, and I know that you were traveling as well. So glad that you were able to get back home safe and join me this evening as we have a pretty big episode here ahead. So let's waste no more time and get right into it. TCU basketball should be ranked this week after a big time week of results as TCU knocks off number 9 Oklahoma in the midweek game. This was the Big 12 home opener. 80-71 the final score there. We'll hit on that in a little bit, but we have to start with TCU hosting the number 2 team in the country, the Houston Cougars, yesterday evening at Schollmaier Arena. A big crowd. Students still not all back yet from winter break, but the atmosphere was fantastic inside the arena. TCU fell behind a little bit early on. It was very much a defensive battle early on in this game. TCU, I think, only had 4 points in the first 7 minutes or so of the game, but the Frogs did a tremendous job defensively as well. LJ Cryer, Emmanuel Sharp, the 2 leading scorers for Houston coming in, really struggled throughout the entirety of the game. LJ Cryer finished 2 for 14, the former Baylor star, 1 for 7 from 3. Emmanuel Sharp was 2 for 7. Jamal Shed played pretty well. Juwan Roberts was by far the best player on the court for the Cougars, had 20 points, 13 rebounds, five assists, 4 block shots. Later on in the game, he made some big plays, and I was kind of thinking to myself, if Houston went on to win, it was going to be because of Juwan Roberts. He was fantastic for the Cougars, but TCU, with tremendous balance throughout this game, 9 different players scored, 8 different players had at least 1 rebound, and 5 different players had at least 1 assist. So everybody was contributing. Emanuel Miller was the leading scorer with 13 points, which may not seem like much, but there were guys making big shots all throughout the game. Trey Tennyson was fantastic after a rough performance against Oklahoma. He was 0 for 8 in that game, but he came back with 4 3-pointers made in this game, was huge in the second half, had a big 3 from the corner with about a minute left. This was after Shed made a step back 3, I believe, to make it a 4-point game in the final minute. Tennyson knocks down the 3 from the corner, makes it a 1-point game. Emanuel Miller, once again, after the game-winning 3 against Georgetown, makes a great baseline cut in the final moments of this game. Houston was going back and forth defensively, playing some man, playing some zone. I think their zone actually gave TCU some fits at times. It seemed like the Frogs weren't really sure where to drive the ball when Houston was in its zone, but the Cougars went zone in the last defensive possession. Avery Anderson drives to the right, makes an awesome pass down the baseline to Emanuel Miller, finishes the layup through contact. TCU takes a 1-point lead with 6 seconds to go. Houston has a timeout, doesn't use it. They inbound the ball, dribble it past the half-court line. Micah Peavy, off-ball defender, comes over, gets a steal, walks away with the ball, and the buzzer sounds. The fans rush the court. TCU knocking off the Houston Cougars, 68-67, the final score of this one. Both teams defended really well in this game. This was another game like the Kansas one where neither team really generated too big of a lead. I think TCU in the second half was up by as many as 7 points, but Houston was answering with big shots throughout the second half. At one point, the Cougars got up by 4 late in the game, but Tennyson was huge in this one. Avery Anderson was making some great passes throughout the entire contest. And TCU got some good minutes from Xavier Cork off the bench. Jameer Nelson had some good minutes off the bench. Jacoby Coles made his return. He's been off for a couple of games with an injury. He didn't do much in this game, but it was nice just to see him back out there. And hopefully TCU can get him into a rhythm over these next couple of games. But ultimately, it's a enormous win for TCU, as the Frogs probably will be ranked in the next poll that gets released. Back-to-back wins over top 10 teams. Really a series of bad officiating moments away from being 3-0 in the Big 12, which, Anthony, I know when you and I were talking about the non-conference schedule coming to a close, what our expectation was for these 3 games with number 2 team in the country, number 9 team, and then number 3 team. I think you and I would have been happy to just get 1 win out of these 3, but to walk away with 2 wins and to come a couple of points short against Kansas in Lawrence, you have to be absolutely thrilled with how TCU has started this Big 12 schedule so far.
The Frogs absolutely flipped that switch. I mean, turned it on once conference play started. It was always, with the way non-conference was laid out, you never know with that level of competition whether they could turn it on. And in those contests against top competition, quad 1 level competition in the non-conference, they didn't show up. But man, this has been as good a start to the conference season as you could have ever imagined. I mean, like you said, the way this schedule laid out, just brutal way to start. And I mean, it doesn't really get any easier. TCU has the Big 12 is crazy. I mean, Houston loses this game and they lose their previous game. So they're on a 2-game losing streak and are still number 1 at Ken Palm. And so this is, by the metrics, this is still the best team in the country, and they are tied for 7th in the conference at 1-2 in Big 12 play. The Big 12 is madness like that. And, this is it maybe doesn't feel like it's as big a win as last season winning at Kansas, just because of that venue and that team. But this is probably right below that as big a win as this program has earned. You know, as worthy of a court storming as you can get. I know a lot of people go back and forth about whether that's something you should do or not, or this is TCU has moved beyond that, and I don't think so. I think you beat a number 2 team in the country at home, storm that court, and in the way that it happened too, because the end of this game, I think a pretty masterclass from Jamie Dixon. Just have to shout out the way that he handled this final minute, and then the execution from the guys on the court.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the Tennyson answer on the 3-pointer to keep the game close. I mean, you miss that shot and Houston probably goes down and scores, or you have to foul and it becomes a 3-possession game and the game's over. You make that shot and now you're only down 1. Houston has the ball and misses the front end of a 1-and-1, and it's game on.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, to TCU's credit, for a team that is so used to running out and sprinting on a fast break, that final possession was meticulous. To work the shot clock down, to work the game clock down into the final seconds, and work the ball all through the progression to set up that back cut from Emanuel Miller, to you know, the way the Kansas game ended, where it was hectic and Jameer Nelson is just kind of sprinting up the court and chucks up a shot. This was the opposite of that. This was well considered, and put an excellent opportunity with a shot at the basket, rather than, you know, attempting a much more difficult shot from further away. So I think big shout out to the coaching staff for setting that up, and for, man, Avery Anderson. He struggled a little bit in that first half. Really, I guess everybody did, shooting wise. I mean, it was both teams were shooting low percentages. It was a defensive slugfest to open this game. Lots of fouls being called. I know there's probably some question marks about how TCU was whistled for 10 fewer fouls in this game across the entire game. And, you know, I mean, that's kind of the way that Houston plays, though. Houston is a very physical team,
Mm-hmm.
and they body up on both sides of the court, and sometimes you're going to get whistled for that. So I don't know. I don't follow every single Houston game to know if that's how they're getting whistled every game, but it certainly the foul number disparity played a factor in the game, and TCU didn't shoot particularly well from the free throw line, but getting those opportunities was pretty big. But I think to get that last shot, Emanuel Miller has been playing out of his mind really all season, but hitting conference play, he's been simply one of the best players in the conference. And for him to get that second game winner for him on the season, I think we could be looking at him as potential first team all conference at this point. So I think this is as big a win as TCU can get. Huge for obviously for the March resume, huge for the conference standings, to be able to bank these wins against the top competition. I mean, even the lowly teams in the conference are picking up wins. I mean, West Virginia beat Texas over the weekend. So there's no easy game. So anytime you can bank a win, it's huge. And to get it over these top teams, you really set yourself up to have if TCU has a 500 or better record in the conference, I mean, you could be looking at a 4 or 5 seed into the NCAA tournament. So excellent performance from TCU, and as huge a result as the program has had maybe outside of that Kansas win last season.
And what really stood out for me over the last 5-6 minutes of the game was TCU hardly made any mental errors down the stretch. And that was really important because TCU played without any timeouts over the last roughly 5 minutes of the game. And for TCU to go that long without making any critical errors really stood out. And Jamie Dixon talked after the game about just, he said it to the players in the locker room, we're the smartest team in the country. And they played really smart basketball down the stretch and put themselves in a position to win. Watching this game, I really felt like Houston, everything they were doing, their athleticism really stood out. They were doing a lot more one-on-one offensively, but they had guys who could really put the ball on the floor and get to the basket. TCU was definitely challenged on the interior, but Ernest Uday, I thought, gave TCU some really good minutes. He had
Excellent.
9 rebounds in this game. He had a couple of big second half putbacks, even though he didn't knock down his free throws. He was playing big down there when he needed to. A couple of big putback shots. The only real bugaboo for TCU in this game was the free throw shooting. It was really encouraging to see the Frogs get to the line, but I think they missed probably 14 or 15 free throws in this game. So they make about half of those that were missed, and the game might not be as close, but it was encouraging to see the Frogs continue to attack against a team that really made it difficult early on. The first 7-8 minutes of this game, it was just kind of a nightmare to try and get to the basket. Houston was just a wall defensively, but TCU continued to attack. Trey Tennyson unlocked the offense seemingly with his shooting. He's been such a difference maker for this team. And just watching TCU run offense in the second half, when he was out there and when he was on the bench, it was almost like night and day, because Tennyson had a little bit of foul trouble in this game. He had 4 fouls. He finished the game with 4 fouls. But when he was off the floor, there just wasn't anybody out there who was really a threat to shoot the ball. So Houston was able to sit in zone sometimes, pack the paint. Miller wasn't able to score much out of the low post late in the game. Xavier Cork, Isam Mustafa, they tried to get a couple of low post opportunities and got swatted away by Juwan Roberts. But when Tennyson was out there, and when he's knocking down shots like this, we saw it in the Kansas game, we saw it again in this Houston game, he's really the player that's the key to unlock this offense. And if TCU can continue to get really good minutes from Jameer Nelson and Xavier Cork and Chuck O'Bannon off the bench, as they did in the Oklahoma game as well, this is a TCU team that can win a lot of different ways. You said it, Anthony, that TCU didn't really shoot the ball very well, and yet they beat the number 2 team in the country despite shooting in the 30s percentage-wise and missing almost half of their free throws. So you have to be ecstatic about how TCU has started this Big 12 schedule. And I guess if we can hit on the Oklahoma game real quick, this was the midweek game that TCU played. It was the Big 12 home opener, and Emanuel Miller was the best player on the floor in this one. He had 27 points. He had 9 rebounds, 6 of which were offensive rebounds. Avery Anderson really struggled in the first half. He was 1 for 10, but he made 4 shots in the second half, finished with 15 points, 5 assists. Chuck O'Bannon had 11 off the bench. Jameer Nelson had a big game off the bench as well with 13 points. I think 7 rebounds and 4 assists. And TCU knocks off the Sooners 80-71. And with this win over Houston now, getting to 13-3 overall, 2-1 in the Big 12. A couple more Big 12 games this week. TCU will go to Cincinnati on Wednesday, and then return to Schollmaier with students back in the classroom against Iowa State on Saturday the 20th. So you have to imagine that's going to be a very raucous crowd in Fort Worth. I expect the home fans to really show out and give TCU a big home court advantage. But Anthony, what stood out to you the most about this Oklahoma game? And whether it was Emanuel Miller's performance or the guys off the bench, what stood out to you about this one?
Well, I think the first thing was TCU again in this one was able to get key players into foul trouble for Oklahoma. I think this Oklahoma team has been um, playing winning games that it wasn't expected to. It being in the top 10, it being in the top 10 in the Big 12 was not predicted coming into the season, much less top 10 in the country. So, they were playing a bit over its head but getting the big men in foul trouble early. I think Godwin ended up not fouling out for Oklahoma, but they had as he would check back into the game and pick up another foul. I don't know how many minutes he finished with, but he was much less of a factor than you would have expected. And, I think TCU took advantage of that a little bit. Chuck O'Bannon returning was a huge boost. I mean, he was as much a contributor, and it adds to you were saying after the Houston game about being the smartest team. I mean, the experience, the age, the sheer number of major college basketball minutes that exists on this team.
Mhm.
It's hard to match that. The experience of Avery Anderson comes out cold, has a series of turnovers. He's having a rough time, and he just turns it on. He's the kind of guy who can, when he turns it on, you got to watch out because it becomes an electric player. And then Emanuel Miller, I mean, 27 points, dominant, 9 rebounds. This was a game TCU got to the line a whole bunch and made their free throws. It was different in that way from the Houston game. But I think that even with Miller having this outstanding game, you still have another 3 frogs in double digits. It's still a 28 points off the bench. This team is deep, is experienced, and in a game like this at home against a team that's probably evenly matched with you, TCU was able to kind of handle business in this one. One of those that, even more than the Houston game, shows that TCU probably steps up in where it stands in station, in that TCU might not be mired in that middle ground of the Big 12, which obviously still is one of the middle of the Big 12 is among the best in the country, but might be closer towards that top 5 of the Big 12 rather than towards the bottom 6 or 7. So I think it's going to be very interesting looking forward, because this Cincinnati game is sneaky. I think that maybe TCU fans might be looking ahead to that Iowa State game, knowing that Iowa State has the metrics, Iowa State has the history, Iowa State obviously is a longtime conference mate. That's going to be a big, big game back in Fort Worth on Saturday. But this trip to Cincinnati, man, is going to be really, really tough. Cincinnati has been very impressive through its 3 games of the Big 12 schedule. Falling at the final seconds to Texas, putting up a very, very strong fight in Waco against Baylor, and going into Provo and stealing a win against a very strong BYU team. So, although the record may not be super scary and the metrics may not be super scary, I wouldn't be surprised if TCU is an underdog in this game, even after the success of this past week. I think it's a huge game. That is it's been very clear in the Big 12 through the first week and a half of the season that winning on the road in conference is going to be very difficult, even for the very best teams. And Cincinnati has one such road win, and they have a strong home environment, and I think TCU will have to play up to what, near its peak standards to come away with a win in the midweek.
Yeah, there's certainly no game off in the Big 12 in men's basketball. And I watched some of the Cincinnati Baylor game. It came on right after the TCU Houston game, so I had it on my stream. I was watching the majority of the first half, and the Cincinnati team can really play. I mean, they went on the road and nearly knocked off a ranked Baylor team that only won by 3. So this is going to be a really tough game for the Frogs. Like I said, it's nice to see Jacoby Coles back out there, and it looks like TCU is getting back to full strength with its full plethora of weapons. And just a couple final notes from me on these games over Oklahoma and Houston. Having 2 guys come off the bench and score in double figures against the Sooners, that's a big deal. And the lack of ego on this team is also something that I think needs to be taken notice of, because Jameer Nelson, he starts the season, he gets moved to the bench, but he's still been a regular contributor, and he's really taking on that 6th man role, being a meaningful contributor. And then Chuck O'Bannon is a 7th-year player that's coming off the bench and has had multiple big games for TCU now this year. And as we've seen in the past, when Chuck O'Bannon is on from 3-point range, much like what we've seen from Trey Tennyson this season, he's a big difference maker for the offense as well. So I was really happy to see the bench step up in both of these games. TCU had, I think, 21 bench points against Houston. So just very, very exciting. I mean, my downstairs neighbors probably don't like me very much after the Houston game, because I was kind of losing my mind there over the last minute of the game. Tennyson knocks down the 3. TCU gets the stop. Houston goes into zone during that last possession, and they're just kind of stalling, balls out by half court, and I'm just kind of, yelling in my head. I'm just like, someone's got to drive the ball, look for a baseline pass or something. Yeah. Someone's got to make something happen. And Avery Anderson threads the needle, gets it to Miller, and super exciting for all the fans and all the students, fans who were at that game, who had the opportunity to rush the court. I was only able to rush the court one time as a student. I think that was back in 2012 when it was a really bad TCU team. I don't know if that team won more than one conference game that year, but TCU was like 240 something in RPI, and they beat Kansas by 7. I think that was the Jeff Withy, Ben McLemore Jayhawks who came to Fort Worth and had the chance to rush the court back then. Court rushing, I know, means a little bit less nowadays, since you can basically rush it for anything, but a special moment nevertheless for all the fans, and just really exciting stuff for TCU basketball. And we'll see what the Frogs do, if they can add on to their win total as they get ready to take on Cincinnati Wednesday and Iowa State on Saturday. Anthony, any final notes about these games before we transition here to our next item?
No, I was just going to give my student court rushing experience. I was in school when TCU was in the Mountain West and was one of the worst teams in the Mountain West. So that was bad times for TCU basketball. But TCU, it might have been 2007, I think, beat an Air Force team that was ranked in the top 15. There might have been, a couple hundred people in what was the Daniel Meyer Coliseum at the time. And I think it might have been me and like 2 or 3 buddies, but we jumped on that court and celebrated with Super Frog and the team. It's a fun time. And it's a little bit different atmosphere when you take down the number 2 team in the country for your second top 10 win in the week. And, this win over Oklahoma is a top 10 win, and we're just kind of ho-hum, putting that in the background and trying to look ahead forward. But that's the station that TCU basketball is at this point, that Jamie Dixon has put it in, that this roster, what it means, to win a top 10 game. It just means the next one means more. So I think that it is setting up for a very exciting season. And yeah, watching the end of the Houston game, I was actually on a flight. So I didn't have any downstairs neighbors, but it was late and, people are trying to sleep around me, and I've got my kids next to me, and I'm, that get able to stream it on the Wi-Fi on the plane with the live TV. And it's just a very exciting experience, even though I kind of had to keep myself muffled, but I did give like a big hand raise. And, I think it's a good time. And I think it will be exciting to see what this team accomplishes going forward.
Yeah, I was pretty impressed that TCU didn't rush the court after the Oklahoma game. I thought maybe there might be a chance that we might get a court rush
TCU
here.
was favored by like 4 points. I mean, they covered the spread, but they were favored over a top 10 team at home. So
impressed.
The odds makers knew. Not an upset.
Fans. Yeah, impressed with the fans in that one, but a well-earned court rush against Houston. And one last final note here before we transition. Just looking at the TCU schedule for the rest of this Big 12 slate, it is noteworthy that TCU won't get Kansas or Houston for a second time for the remainder of the regular season. So, yes, the Big 12 is bonkers. I mean, we saw UCF beat Kansas. We saw West Virginia beat Texas. There have been multiple big upsets already, but the schedule does get a smidge lighter for TCU, not having to play Kansas or Houston a second time. So I think there are going to be plenty of more exciting moments to come over these next couple of months. And who knows, we might get another court rushing experience here in the next several weeks, but that'll remain to be seen.
I guess before we close on basketball, because we won't get to talk again before the Cincinnati game, Cincinnati has a big man who is their leading scorer, and we've obviously seen TCU struggle with that type of situation from an opponent in the past, Hunter Dickinson, PJ Hall, and in years past as well. So I think if TCU is able to show that they can slow one of these skilled big dudes that is the opponent's top scorer, I think it would show a huge step forward that can show that TCU can play with anybody. I think it's like, I'm going to keep saying it. This is a very, very dangerous game for TCU. And I think TCU should not be favored, but I think that is one where watch out for that. If TCU is able to find a way, I can't even think of his name right now. It's like Lotkin or Lotvin or something like that. It's a Russian guy. He's like 7 foot tall. And he's good. So look out for that, TCU fans. And I think it is an opportunity, though, for TCU to show its ability to stop somebody of that level.
Mm-hmm. And we will continue, of course, to follow TCU men's basketball, not only here on Frogs Up, but at our website, frogsofwar.com, and on our Facebook and Twitter at Frogs of War, as we'll stick with basketball here. And we're going to hit on women's basketball real quick. We're not going to spend too much time here because there isn't a whole lot here to talk about. TCU traveled to Austin for a big game against number 10 Texas in the midweek. TCU really battled throughout this game, but again, playing without Sedona Prince, who suffered the broken finger last week against Baylor, underwent surgery on that finger, is going to be out for a while. TCU fell short, ultimately falling 72-60, but things going from bad to worse as TCU traveled to Houston to take on the Cougars yesterday, and Jaden Owens goes out with a knee injury. She went for a jump stop and just her knee kind of locked up and she fell to the ground and was rolling on the court for a little bit, had to be helped off the court, and was on the bench with a towel over her head. Just a horrible break for TCU, as not only do the Frogs lose this game 77-66, 4-game losing streak now for the women's team after starting 14-0. Now you're looking at being without Jaden Owens potentially for quite a while. And it was going to be a gauntlet for TCU to win in the Big 12 without Sedona Prince, who's averaging 21, 10, and 3-4 blocks a game. Now you got to go forward without your starting point guard potentially for a few weeks or maybe even several weeks. I haven't seen an update yet on the severity of the injury. Hopefully it's not serious, but should Jaden Owens have to miss extended time, it's just brutal. I don't know if there's an adjective to describe something beyond brutal, but it's just so unfortunate for this team because it really felt like this team was on the verge of doing something really special. And for all we know, Owens and Prince can get healthy by the end of the regular season, and maybe TCU can make a big run in the Big 12 tournament or in some other postseason tournament. But to have to go forward in this conference schedule now without Prince and without Owens is a extremely tall order. And Madison Connor has continued to play at a really high level, which is encouraging to see. Agnes Emma Anopu has had some big games. Aaliyah Robertson has moved into the starting lineup. But TCU's depth is really going to be tested over these next few weeks. And I hate to say that it's going to be tough for TCU just to, tread water over these next few weeks, but it's going to be really hard for TCU to win games in this conference without two of its three best players. So hopefully TCU can get some big contributions from players like Victoria Flores, who's been coming off the bench, or Sydney Harris, the former MAC Conference Freshman of the Year. She's been getting some run over the last couple of games. Someone else is going to have to step up other than Madison Connor over these next few weeks for TCU. And you really hope that the season doesn't really landslide from here, because that would be a real shame. But just another unfortunate piece of injury news for TCU, as the Frogs could be without their starting point guard here for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, and the schedule only continues to be really brutal for TCU. I mean, coming up just this week is Kansas State, who's a top 15 team, and Iowa State, who in Ames, who just took down Baylor. So those are two extremely difficult, very much losable games for TCU women's basketball, that this slide could certainly continue at least another week. It's really, man, it's just so unfortunate that these injuries have piled up, and it just shows how, how strong this team was coming into the conference schedule, getting that win over BYU, fighting with Baylor even after Prince got hurt in the first minute. I think this Texas game was an absolute fight as well. I think the final score is very lopsided, but I think TCU was down maybe 4 or 5 going into the fourth quarter, had it cut to 1 in the fourth quarter, but had like a 6-minute stretch without scoring in the fourth quarter, and Texas was able to end up running away with it. I know we kind of talked about how Houston on the men's side, Houston and their fans were complaining about the disparity in foul calls. Well, in Austin, the game between Texas and TCU, Texas shot 32 free throws in that game. TCU shot 8. So that's the whistle certainly didn't do any favors there, and probably part of that is Texas was attacking, a defense that was without Sedona Prince is going to struggle to handle players as talented as the ones that Texas has. So again, that's the way the whistle goes, but TCU held in there tight with that game, and I think this Houston game with Jaden Owens going out, it just kind of feels like, maybe TCU will get their legs back under them again going into this Kansas State game back in Schollmaier. I think that's a huge game. Hopefully, students back in session, people come out and support and go check out that game. But that is a huge game, and it's a very, very difficult game. And, I think if TCU can show some continued fight in them. I think it's a pretty big place to be able to show that against a top 15 opponent.
Yeah, this TCU team is in dire need of a win right now, and hopefully the Frogs can upset one of these opponents here coming up and get back in the winning column. As we'll continue to follow the women's program as well here on Frogs Up and also online at frogsawar.com. And with that, we'll go ahead and move into our next item here, TCU football news. For anyone who wasn't on social media over the weekend, TCU football made some big waves in the transfer portal. This has been kind of a theme for TCU this offseason. It seems like they'll do some work behind the scenes for a couple of weeks, and then we'll have a day where 3, 4, 5 players all announce commitments to the Frogs. And we had another one of those days yesterday as TCU had 6 players from the portal announce commitments to come to Fort Worth for the 2024 season. 5 of them defensive backs. I have all the names in front of me right now. The non-defensive back was Miami offensive lineman Lucas Vargas Diaz, who was a freshman last year. Not sure if he got on the field. I think this is more of just a depth acquisition, but he did play his high school ball at Fort Bend Christian in Texas. So a Texas kid coming back home. But the defensive backs, 3 safeties and 2 cornerbacks. We have Nevada safety Richard Toney, Austin Peay safety Javon McIver, who was a first-team all-conference player at the FCS level, Memphis safety Cameron Smith, Old Dominion cornerback Lamarion James, who was also a return specialist, and then perhaps the most notable, New Mexico State cornerback Andre Selden, who was a 4-star recruit in high school, started his career at Michigan, spent 2 seasons with the Wolverines, transferred out, and has played at a really high level for New Mexico State, a program that had a really successful season this year. So collectively, these are all guys that what stood out to me is they've all played a lot of football over the last few years. Smith, James, Selden, McIver, Toney, these are all guys that are 3-year, 4-year college players and have anywhere from 20-something to 30-something games played during that stretch. So these are guys who have played meaningful reps. They've been out on the field. They're obviously looking for an opportunity to play at a higher level and take their game to the next level. And we'll see how many of these guys can be in the mix for 2024. I think it's really important for TCU to stockpile some DBs because there are a lot of guys who aren't going to be on the roster from 2023. And I guess for anyone wondering why the heck is TCU going so hard for defensive backs? Well, Andy Avalos coming over from Boise State to be the new defensive coordinator is still going to have a scheme like Joe Gillespie where you have 5 defensive backs. So you need a lot of depth in the secondary anyway, but consider these factors as well. Josh Newton, Mark Perry, Millard Bradford, they're all going to be off the roster. Perry and Newton are going to the NFL draft. Not sure what Bradford's plans are, but those are 3 guys who were seniors this past season. You had 7 players in the secondary leave via the transfer portal. Randon Fontenette, Chase Biddle, Javion Wilcox, all of those are former 4-star guys. Ish Burdine, Jayonte McMillan, Mason White, Davion Crawford, those are all veteran guys that are gone as well. So 3 players that were senior starters, you have to replace 7 guys in the secondary leaving through the portal. And then you lost a couple of high school JUCO recruits as well. Jair Smith flipped from TCU to Cal, and LaDainian Fields flipped from TCU to Oklahoma State. So in total, that's 12 players in the secondary that.
And Donovan Saunders, the Cal Poly flipped to Texas A&M, the transfer.
Yep. So that's 13 guys actually that will not be on the roster for 2024. So not going to lie, I'm still a little salty about the Donovan Saunders flip because we talked about him.
We were excited.
I know you were excited about him, and he was, a potential day 1 starter for 2024. Then gets the offer from A&M after announcing his commitment to TCU, and then flips. But getting back to these guys here, they've played a lot of ball. You couple these guys with some of the other recent transfer additions like Jace Oliver, the safety from Tulsa, Travis Broughton, the 4-year starting corner from Utah. There's going to be a lot of competition for 2 deep spots in the secondary. And looking at some of the guys coming back, I mean, you have Bud Clark, you have Abe Kamara, you have Jamel Johnson, Avery Helm and Channing Canada are both back at corner, but realistically, how many of those guys are a starter day one, 2024? I think Bud Clark, you could probably pencil him in as a starter. You figure either Avery Helm or Channing Canada will be a starter, but those other 3 spots, there's going to be a lot of competition, and it's going to be really exciting to see how some of these transfers fit in, as well as some of the high school players. There's going to be a pretty insane amount of roster turnover. TCU is now up to 20 total transfer portal additions this offseason. That's right up there with programs like Louisville and Colorado and Texas A&M that have had serious roster overhauls this offseason. So there are going to be a lot of new names, and it's going to be exciting to see how all of this unfolds. But excited to bring these transfers in and looking forward to seeing how some of them will fit into the mix as TCU gets closer to spring ball.
Yeah, for sure. I am looking right now, and TCU still has not updated a 2024 football roster on gofrogs.com. So I think I check that every week when we talk, and I keep hoping to see it up there, because that really helps to understand how these guys are going to fit in. I know there's probably going to be some work to be done headed into spring on where some of these guys end up actually playing, whether they are moving positions, and you know, all what number they're going to wear and what all their measurables come out at and all of that stuff. I think that's all really fun to see. It makes it feel real that these guys are part of the Horned Frog squad and what they're going to be putting on the field in 2024. So looking forward to that. But yeah, I mean, I think this is another case of, with offensive line and now defensive back, where TCU is throwing as many bodies at the situation as it can. You know, are all of these guys going to come in and become, you know, Josh Newton level transfers, or Alana Lee level transfers, something where, you know, you're a day one plug and play starter who plays at an all conference level, all American level? Who knows? I think nobody would have considered that for those guys coming in ahead of their time at TCU. So some of these guys are going to pop and are going to be significant contributors and have every opportunity to put their name in, you know, in Horned Frog history. So I'm looking forward to seeing how it all shakes out. I think it'll make for some really intriguing camp battles and a lot to follow throughout this offseason.
Yeah, the 2 names that intrigue me the most of these new players, Andre Selden, being a former 4-star guy, former Michigan guy, started every game for New Mexico State, I believe, this past season, and I think is a player who realistically could come in and compete for a starting job day one. Also, Richard Toney coming over from Nevada. That's an interesting one to me because TCU also is bringing in a coach from Nevada, Ken Wilson, who's the former head coach of the Wolfpack, was there for 2 seasons as a head coach. He is coming over as a defensive analyst for 2024. So maybe that's a scenario where TCU makes the connection with the coach, and the coach has a positive thing to say about a player, thinks the player can fit in with the new team, new coordinator. So boom, here's an offer. But he's another player that started several games and was very productive. All of these players were really productive, not only throughout their careers, but the 2023 season specifically. These guys had anywhere from 50 to 70 total tackles, 7 to 10 pass breakups. These were all really productive players. So excited to see how they all fit in. And we still have a ways to go before spring ball, which I'd like to imagine by the end of February, early March is when we will finally have that 2024 roster, and we'll get a a good glimpse at who's on the roster, who's not, and as you said, Anthony, it'll feel real that these players are actually TCU Horned Frogs once we get that 2024 roster. But speaking of the transfer portal, and this will be the last, I think, TCU bit of news for this podcast. There was a bit of outgoing transfer news. We've talked about some of the guys like Cordale Russell and Mason White, Randon Fontenette, players that have left Fort Worth to go elsewhere. Chandler Morris announced on social media yesterday that he is going to play at North Texas next year, which I think in our Frogs of War group chat, we kind of jokingly / seriously made the comment that North Texas could be a realistic fit for Chandler Morris because the Mean Green lost their starting quarterback, Chandler Rogers, to the portal. He transferred out to Cal, so they needed a starter. And Chandler Morris has been a relatively productive player when he's been healthy. But as we know, we talked about it, I don't know how many times on the podcast, he's had some injuries and just wasn't able to finish the year as the starter. Josh Hoover is seemingly quarterback one in Fort Worth. So Chandler Morris transfers out and announces his decision to go to North Texas, where I think that could be a good spot for him to put up some big numbers. He's going into his 5th college season. Not sure if this will be a spot where he plays for 1 year, has a good season, and then transfers out again. Who knows what the future holds for these multi-time transfers, but I think Chandler Morris can do well at North Texas, and just hope that he can stay healthy and play a full season and put up some big numbers. Because I still think that if he stays healthy with the right system in place, he can be a productive quarterback and at the Division I level. So best of luck to Chandler Morris, and hopefully he has a really solid 2024 season with the Mean Green.
Yeah, every reason to believe he's going to have statistics that jump off the page for up there in Denton. I think should be a good fit, should be fun, and like you say, I mean, I think if he puts himself back on the map in that way, could find himself back in a Power 5 role or Power 4 role sometime in the future. So I think that's good for him, and certainly wishing him all of the best. The one I just wanted to go back and briefly touch on that of these new guys that I think are intriguing. Just wanted to shout out Old Dominion cornerback Lemarian James. I think his as a kick returner has been particularly productive, and it's a spot where TCU historically has been really strong at the kick return game and punt return game. Darius Davis for many, many years, and Kavonte Turpin and Jeremy Curley and all those guys. It's a long history of an important part of the TCU game that it just didn't happen for the Frogs this year. And I think Major Everhart is a really good football player and is a really good wide receiver and weapon for the offense. But him and Jalen Robinson and JoJo Earl, nobody really ever popped for TCU at the kick returner spots this past season. And I think that's something TCU really needs. It's a piece of the game where it can really take advantage of some spots, and I think Lemarian James will be a big contributor there. And I just think he's a ball player. I mean, he's got like we've said, a long history, track record of production at cornerback, a lot of tackles from the secondary. I think he's just a guy that he could step in and be kind of a leadership voice. I get Josh Newton vibes from him, watching some of his game film, and just reading more about him. And I think I'm really excited to have him in Fort Worth and joining this team. I think he will be a big contributor, and whether it's only on special teams, I don't know, but I think he's should be a guy who competes right away at the cornerback spot as well.
Yeah, all 5 of these DBs, when I was doing the write-ups on Frogs of War, yesterday. The total tackle numbers and the solo tackle numbers definitely stood out. And how many times did we talk on the podcast during the 2023 season about the missed tackles and how critical they were in games like Texas Tech and Kansas State, where it just seemed like nobody could wrap up for the Frogs. And I think the coaching staff going after guys that are proven tacklers, they are probably as fed up as us fans are with the missed tackles, and it's time to get some guys back in that secondary who can really make plays in open space and wrap up. So will be exciting to see, and who knows if this will be the last of the transfer portal roster overhaul for TCU. Again, we still have quite a bit of time until spring ball begins, so continue to follow us here on Frogs Up and online at frogsaward.com as we continue to update everybody on TCU football, as we will transition here into our final item of the podcast this evening. The College Football Playoff National Championship was held on Monday, and my remaining belief in fairy tale endings was crushed handily by the Michigan Wolverines. I picked Washington. For those who don't get that reference, we talked about this game last week, and Anthony picked Michigan. I picked Washington. I was a believer in the destiny, the magic. I felt good about it. I'm out another $10, unfortunately, and Michigan really just dominated this game. I watched this game all the way through, all 3.5 to 4 hours of it, because there were a jillion and a half commercials. But Michigan wins this game, 34-13. Tremendous ground game from Michigan. Donovan Edwards rushes for 2 touchdowns. Blake Corum had a big game as well. Michael Penix Jr. was flustered all night by the Michigan defense, made a couple of big mistakes, turning the ball over, and just was never comfortable. He was beat up after the game. You felt really bad for him because it just seemed like he was kind of off from the start of this game. Never got into much of a rhythm. Roma Dunze, Jalen Polk were not really big factors in this one, and Michigan just handily won the football game. So the Wolverines, Jim Harbaugh, finishing 15-0, put an asterisk on it if you may, but they're national champions. And in the wake of this game, we've had a lot of coaching turnover, as the national championship game is pretty much in the rear view now, because Nick Saban stole the show with the news that he is going to be retiring as the head coach at Alabama. One of the greatest to ever do it in college football. Humongous shoes to fill there. Alabama is already seeing a couple of their big guys leave through the transfer portal. Roydell Williams has already committed to play elsewhere. Caleb Downs might be leaving.
Isaiah Bond is going to Texas.
Yep, going to Texas, making it very clear that it is a business decision for him. But some enormous shoes to fill there, as it'll be Kalen DeBoer from Washington, fresh off of his run to the national championship. He is going to be the next head coach for the Crimson Tide, and it was kind of fascinating how all of this unfolded, because Nick Saban, Kalen DeBoer, and some of the other prominent Division I coaches, Dan Lanning at Oregon, Steve Sarkisian at Texas, Mike Norvell at Florida State, all those guys viewed as potential candidates for the Alabama job, all represented by the same agent, Jimmy Sexton. And
everybody
Nick
gets
Saban
paid.
Retires. Sarkisian seemingly leverages himself into a big contract extension to stay at Texas. Mike Norvell, same thing at Florida State. Dan Lanning staying at Oregon. I know he got a big contract extension a couple of months ago, but it will be Kalen DeBoer going from Washington to Alabama. He reportedly was offered a huge raise to stay with the Huskies. I think they were going to double or more than double his salary, and he opted to leave anyway. So Kalen DeBoer will be the man for the Crimson Tide. And Washington, as of today, has also hired a new coach as well. Jed Fish from Arizona. Wildcats had a great season, beat Oklahoma in the Alamo Bowl. about to come into the Big 12. Very desirable job there. Pretty brutal how that unfolded. Anyone who hasn't been following on social media, apparently the team meeting between Jed Fish and the Arizona players lasted all but 3 minutes. And he got out of there. The players got out of there. Players reportedly really upset. Just pretty brutal. I think sometimes we forget the human element to these kinds of moves. The coaches, as we know, are in the business of wanting to work their way up and get paid, and we get that, but sometimes you feel for the players in some of these situations. But a lot of turnover in the coaching ranks in light of Michigan winning this national championship game and Nick Saban retiring at Alabama. Anthony, what are your thoughts on how all of these things have shook out and transpired over the last week or so?
Well, yeah, I mean, Nick Saban is obviously the headliner here, and should be one of the headliners stories of all across sports. I mean, this is probably the best ever college football coach, hanging it up, and at a pretty interesting time too. I mean, headed into this new, different SEC with the added teams and the removal of divisions, and then the 12-team playoff. I think it's just a very different college football world. I think it would have been. I think college football is going to be worse not having Nick Saban in it. I think he's just he's a character, and he adds an element of there's another boogeyman out there. And I think Georgia is very much the boogeyman now, and Texas is building itself into kind of a juggernaut as well. But to not have, and Alabama will still be fine. But I think that it's impossible shoes to fill. I mean, I don't. I envy the payday that Caleb DeBoer is getting, but I can't imagine the pressure that he's going to feel immediately now, having taken over that job. I mean, you have to have every year. You've got to have a top 3 recruiting class, and you've got to have a top 3 team on the field, and you better win a national championship more often than you lose it. And that is just an impossible bar to have set. So I think that is. It will make the SEC maybe. I don't know if it's more interesting or less interesting. I guess I haven't decided on that yet. I think it makes it less interesting, just because having that Alabama team, even when it's a team that is maybe not the best team that's ever played at Alabama, it's still, like this past season, it's still a team that wins the SEC and goes to the playoff. I think that you may not have that going forward. And that said, Kalen DeBoer wins everywhere he goes, and is a terrific offensive coach in particular. And I think that whether it's Jalen Milroe or whomever ends up being their quarterback, they're going to be all right. For Arizona losing Jed Fish, I mean, I think, Jed Fish was just too scared to play in the Big 12. I think that's clearly what that is. No, I mean, I feel bad for, I mean, they've got some big time players on that team that could probably start anywhere in the country. I mean, wide receiver Tet McMillan, quarterback Noah Fafita. I know that they've given their loyalty to Arizona, but I mean, it's a athletic department that is $250 million in the hole. What kind of payday are they going to be able to shell out to bring in a coach, and also, for all of their supporters to put up NIL funds to keep those superstars in Tucson? I don't know. I think there could be a wave of transfers resulting from this, what seems to be a pretty disastrous exit interview that he had. So I think this also basically keeps the transfer portal rolling, because anytime a coach leaves, that reopens the window for that team for 30 days. So Alabama's transfer window's open again. Washington's transfer window's open again. Arizona's transfer window. So, and that's just going to keep rolling. So, the takeaway here, though, I think is that Jed Fish ends up getting that job instead of one of the other Big 12 coaches that has maybe proven it at a higher level for a longer period of time. I mean, I think of Chris Kleiman and Lance Leipold and Matt Campbell, who it's another coaching carousel goes by, and somehow those Kansas State, Kansas, and Iowa State are able to retain their head coach. I don't know if that says a lot about what those universities have done, about those coaches' dedication to their programs, or maybe those guys are just not getting the looks that maybe Big 12 fans would have expected them to. I think that's a pretty interesting takeaway from really the entire season long and for the past few seasons of coaching carousels.
Mm-hmm. And any thoughts about the national championship game? I know we were joking a little bit last week with there's no such thing as destiny. There's no such thing as magic. I was a believer. I held out hope for as long as I could. I did not want Michigan to win. I wanted Washington. I thought they were my team, and just a tough finish for them.
No, I think it was pretty clear that there was one team who was better on the field, and although they had dumb mistakes, I mean, they're just absolutely dominating this game, and then they line up for like a 4th and 1 and throw a play action pass that's broken up and gives Washington an opportunity. I mean, I think that they still kind of played with their food a little bit, but it didn't burn them like it did against TCU. I mean, as much as Michigan is maligned, I mean, they've lost, 2 games in 3 seasons now?
Yeah.
Both coming in the playoffs. So that Jim Harbaugh, whether he, all of the very obvious cheating that they did, all of the, every time JJ McCarthy opens his mouth in a press conference, it is infuriating. But all of that, they were the better team and they went out and just smashed them. And that was, I think, somewhat predictable unless you still believe in magic. And, that it just wasn't meant to be. I think that's a team that, I think even in a 12-team year, they come out and beat a lot of teams and still win a national championship. I think that this season shaped up where once Georgia didn't make the playoff, it was Michigan's to lose for sure.
Yeah.
And I think that good riddance to Jim Harbaugh and to JJ McCarthy and to whatever nonsense that they're gonna talk, but they won the national championship and they deserved it, and that banner will hang forever.
As we get ready to transition out here for the night, I guess I'll leave this question for you, as this was the last year of the 4-team playoff. Next year, we're going to have the 12-team playoff. I think it's going to be the 6+6 format rather than the 5+7 format. Or it might be the other way around. I can't remember correctly which I think it's they're going to 5+7, right? It's not 6+6.
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess as we go into hypotheticals for that first ever 12-team playoff, who do you have an early favorite? I know there's been some news about Ohio State. They get Will Howard in the transfer portal. Travion Henderson is coming back for one more season. Emeka Egbuka is coming back for one more season. I think those are guys that theoretically could have been first-round draft picks or second-round draft picks this year. They're coming back. They have some big defensive contributors coming back. I think they might be an early favorite to win it all next year. But, I mean, you have to think Texas is going to be in a good position with Quinn Ewers and the defensive studs that are coming back there. Georgia, as always, will be in a great spot. Who's your early pick to win the national championship next year?
Yeah, I think it has to be Georgia, Texas, Oregon. I guess Ohio State. Yeah, I mean, I think
Yeah.
I'm probably lower on Ohio State than consensus. Travion Henderson is a big name coming back, but he was not very impressive. Really hasn't been impressive since he was a true freshman. Egbuka coming back is big. The defensive guys coming back, and as much as Will Howard dominated TCU during his time, I don't know if is he that much of an upgrade over what you had in McCord, or I think seeing what CJ Stroud has done in the NFL and how impressive he's been, I think maybe Ohio State fans took for granted how incredible he was and how much he personally contributed to their level of success during his time there. I don't know. I don't know that they should be the favorite. It's probably, I think Texas has a very manageable schedule and is almost, I would say, is guaranteed to be in the playoff. Texas would have to lose 4 games to miss the playoff because they are Texas. They play in the SEC, and even if they lose 4 games, oh well, yeah, they lost to Georgia and Michigan and whatever. They're going to be in the playoff, and they will be. They should be one of your. I don't know if the early odds have come out, probably, but if they're not first or second, I'd be a little surprised. And then what Oregon, what Dan Lanning is doing in Oregon, I mean, they just got Evan Stewart, the Texas A&M wide receiver, transferred up there. I think they're going to be very, very dangerous in the Big Ten, probably competing for that Big Ten title. So those would probably be my 4: Texas, Georgia, Oregon, and Ohio State.
Yeah, I agree with you 100% on all 4 of those. What Oregon is doing in the recruiting cycle right now in the transfer portal, Dan Lanning is doing amazing things up there right now. Ohio State's bringing all their studs back. Texas is going to have a stout defense again, I think, and Georgia is just the boogeyman now. And I think the team to beat in the SEC with Alabama losing Nick Saban. Florida State maybe could be in a position to hang around if they can get some production from the quarterback position. And I think in the new Big 12, we'll see if there's a team in the new Big 12 that can maybe make a run. But I agree with the 4 teams that you put out there, and I don't know enough about who's all coming back. And I know teams like Texas A&M and Louisville and Colorado and some others have had really big hits in the transfer portal so far, but I think some of those programs are also quite a ways away from competing at that national championship caliber level. So, yeah, I agree with you. Oregon, Georgia, Ohio State, and Texas are probably the
somebody
favorites.
from the ACC will be there. I mean, I think somebody will be very much one of the teams that's competitive, but I don't know if it'll be Miami or Florida State or Clemson. I think with Cam Ward returning to college to go to Miami, I think that is an intriguing move there. It could be them. I don't know. Somebody from the Big 12 will be in the mix, but there's no telling. It could be TCU. It could be Utah. Who knows? But yeah, I think those 4 teams are probably head and shoulders above everyone else. And we'll get to hear all year about, well, if we just had a 4-team playoff, it would have been better. That's a better world. That, all those people who cover college football but don't actually like college football will tell you that for sure.
Yeah, we're going to be splitting hairs next year about who should be number 12 and who should be number 13, as opposed to who should be number 4 and who should be number 5, like we've had to deal with over the last few years. But I'm looking forward to the 12-team playoff. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I think it's going to be really competitive. I will say this about the majority of these 14 playoff games over the last couple of years. There have been some absolute bangers over the last couple of years. I mean, last season especially with TCU Michigan, Ohio State Georgia, Washington Texas was a solid game this year. Michigan Alabama going to overtime. Super entertaining to watch, and there's no doubt that we're going to get some more entertaining college football as things transition over to that 12-team playoff next year. And I think with that, we've covered everything on our slate this evening. Anthony, I don't know if you have any final thoughts that you want to share before we wrap up tonight.
Hey, just shout out Charlie Hustle has a new hoodie out for TCU basketball. So, go check that. It's cold out there. You need a new hoodie.
Oh yeah.
Get you a TCU basketball hoodie. Use code Frogs of War. Use code 101215 if you're getting one of the Houston hoodies or the Colorado hoodie or whatever else. But go check out Charlie Hustle. I'm rocking Charlie Hustle sweatshirt. It's super comfortable. It's these Charlie Hustle sweatshirts are maybe I got two of them when they were having a big sale like right after Christmas, and they're like my two new favorite pieces of clothing. So I would definitely say highly recommend as a verified customer of Charlie Hustle, go get their merch. Particularly right now, these sweatshirts they can't be topped. So go get your Charlie Hustle. Use code FrogsOWar for 15% off your order.
Yeah, and if y'all haven't seen that hoodie, check out our Facebook or our Twitter at Frogs of War. We have a photo posted there. I'm wearing my TCU Frogs basketball jersey that I got at the Schollmaier Arena when I was there earlier this year. I know it's minus 15 up here, but I had to break this out just to celebrate the big win last night. But yeah, Charlie Hustle, use that code Frogs of War. Be sure to get that hoodie, and we should have some more Charlie Hustle news to share within this next week or so. So stay tuned on the Frogs Up podcast. We'll have some more to share, hopefully here in the next week or so, as we'll go ahead and sign off for the evening here. We appreciate everybody continuing to listen and support us here on the Frogs Up TCU Sports Podcast. Continue to follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Frogs of War, and be sure to check out our website, frogsofwar.com, as we continue to cover all of the latest and greatest in TCU sports. The non-rev sports are back in action as well. We'll have some non-rev stuff posted to the website here soon. We've got football updates. We've got plenty of basketball content, a lot going on in Funky Town, as we will go ahead and sign off for the night. I am Russ Hodges. That is Anthony North. And we will sign off with a Frogs Up.
Get your frogs up.